Hello and welcome everybody. Thanks a lot for joining today's Ipsos webinar about how physical and digital fundamentals are changing. My name is Martin Femberg and I'm part of the Ipsos team in Switzerland. If you have any questions during the presentation, please don't hesitate to use the Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will try to answer as many of your questions as possible at the end of this session. And now I'm happy to introduce you to the Ipsos team that is with us today, starting with Alison. Alison is responsible on a global level for shopper journey and all shopper related topics. Then we have Tony with us. He's responsible on a global level for customer experience activation. I'm happy that Marianne is joining. She is the business unit lead for innovation, market strategy and understanding for clients that are based in Switzerland. And we have Stefan with us. He is responsible for customer experience and channel performance, also based in Switzerland, and as well as Marianne, they are both responsible for clients that have a global focus as well as a local focus. And now I'm happy to hand it over to you, Alison. Looking forward to the presentation.
Great, thank you, Martin, and thanks everyone who's joining us today. I'm very excited to be here, and the voices you'll hear at the beginning are myself and Tony, and then we'll be joined by the others sharing very specific case studies. Please do, if you have questions, share them in the chat box because we want to hear them. And hopefully at the end, we'll have a little time for any voice questions as well. So in terms of our topics today, really what we're talking about is how do we help drive success in omnichannel? And omnichannel includes e-commerce, it includes physical stores. You'll hear me talk about ecosystems. That's really what this is about. No longer can you think about e-commerce separate from physical stores. You really have to be thinking about them in an integrated fashion. So we've split the information sharing into 4 sections today. I'm going to start talking about these emerging ecosystems and how they're changing shopping and how COVID has accelerated that. Tony's going to talk about the importance of safety and trust, and COVID has changed in that for a very, very, very long time. And there's some great learning from the industry that we think will stay, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. I'll come back and talk more about some new technologies, not just for shopping, but also for shopper research. And then Tony will talk about how do you better measure and meet raised expectation from order to delivery. So we will be going back and forth. There's a lot of information, and of course we will be sharing the PDF with you after the fact so you can enjoy and not have to write everything down. So let's talk for a minute, and we promise this is not a presentation focused solely on COVID. We're sharing data and sharing data from a bunch of different countries as illustrative. And that illustration is really focused on several things. That includes radical decline of physical store only retailers. It's an industry that's been fragile, and it's getting more fragile every minute around the world. All kinds of sectors have changed and transformed to deal with a lockdown and a safe shopping world, and we expect that to continue. We talk about continually digital transformation, and we expect many of those behaviors to be durable. And then lastly, from a payment standpoint, in many places, many parts of the world, cash is almost an antique, and it was headed that way before, and it's getting more and more so all the time. So let's talk about some of the behaviors that will stick. We have been tracking, Ipsos has been tracking throughout this pandemic, the different types of sentiments among consumers as they go through what so many of us have been through over the last several months. And as you move from a world where you're unaffected by the pandemic to you're deep into it and adjusting and acclimating to getting ready to return to some form of normalcy, whatever that is, we're seeing feelings change greatly. And I won't read all these to you, but let's talk about, I'll talk about where I am. We are very much in acclimation and anticipation here in the US. We are not anywhere near a new normal. And thanks to some very poor behaviors that many of you have seen on television, there's parts of this country that are actually going backward in this anticipation. But as you think about where we are and where I personally am, it's anticipating. I'm tired of it and I'm bored. But I'm also starting to think about what shopping behaviors will stick, right? We were already a heavy e-commerce household to begin with, and we became almost 100% e-commerce during the deepest parts of this pandemic. And many of those behaviors will continue to stay. We're also starting to get more price sensitive and starting to realize that this recessionary environment is here for a while. And our house is full. The cupboards are full from hoarding, and we need to get rid of that. And we need to lighten our load, both financially as well as all the extra things that we stocked up on, preparing for the worst. So as you start to think about your country where you are, obviously, you know, our hosts are here in Switzerland, and they're starting further down towards the new normal, and they were very careful during this pandemic. But there's still behaviors that will stick, and one of which is particularly around pricing and being extra careful and doing extra research around shopping. So here's a few examples, and there's a lot of numbers on this page, and when you get the PDF, you can focus on the ones that are most interesting to you. But I want to highlight two, and they're the ones that are in larger font here. So before this thing, people were talking about spending more time researching online as we're getting ready for this scary thing that could come. And you'll start to see that researching online in that bottom row is beginning to go down, but it's still dramatically higher than it was a year ago. Everyone is researching online, and yes, a lot of that is about price. And so then as you start to move up this chart and you think about being more mindful of how much I spend, you see over on the right, people who are starting to feel they're in the new normal, 55% are more mindful of how much they spend than they were before. And that number's been pretty consistent across the pandemic. And I should tell you, this data is from Spain. So just as an example, everyone is being more mindful, and we need to worry about that. We also need to think about fewer trips to the store. We need to think about buying new products. There's been a lot of experimentation happening during this pandemic, and we need to get closer to our shoppers in our categories. So you may be thinking, well, this isn't new, right? E-commerce was growing before the pandemic, and that's absolutely true. And heavily it was growing because of convenience. And convenience quickly turned into convenience and safety. But you start to look at examples, whether it's the overnight or same-day delivery from Amazon, or whether it's the rise of voice ordering for things as mundane as a coffee, or even home delivery of takeout food that's very cheap takeout food, driving around as picture on scooters. These are things we wouldn't have thought of 4 years ago, and they all really have exploded during this last few months. You can see some of the spikes for e-commerce in just some representative countries, and this was in March, so it varies depending on where the virus was the worst, but you can see significant growth in every country we looked at, and particularly some of those countries. Here's Italy as an example, that was not a heavy e-commerce market last year, way behind in e-commerce development. And this doesn't even include the Asian countries, of course, which are already far more developed in many, many cases. You can also see on the right the big difference in the high development markets. So particularly China is a great example, is fresh food. China was very heavily e-commerce. That's not a secret. It's not insightful. But what's amazing is how many Chinese shoppers have gone to buying their fresh food online, and even if it's for click and collect. So significant growth in that arena around the world. So the other thing that's happening is this growth isn't just because the same old retailers are switching to e-commerce, or even because of Alibaba or Amazon or any of the big well-known players. It's a lot of direct-to-consumer companies. This is Casper mattresses, bike riding through the streets of New York to deliver a mattress in this crazy world of home improvement. If we had a real picture from today, he probably would have to be wearing a mask. That's a really innovative thing that we would not have been thinking about just even 24 months ago. And we're seeing that across so many different categories. Rappi in Latin America, it's $1 billion company now, and they will deliver just about everything you want, ranging from your groceries to your laundry detergent to your prescriptions to cash. So you can get anything you want delivered via scooter, and that's a business that just exploded during the safety concerns. So here's just a data overload page, and it did it because people on this call care about a lot of different categories, and you're in a very diverse market. And so I just wanted to share, if you add the blues together, and that's the best way to think about this chart, that's the percent of people shopping in either purely online or in what we call click and collect, where you're doing the research online, but you're picking it up and actually doing the transaction in person. And so you see, even in groceries and healthcare, which are still the lesser developed from e-commerce, there's a significant group, and this is Spain data, so a low e-commerce market traditionally, a significant group that has moved to e-commerce during the pandemic, and we expect that will really stick. Why? Why do people like it? This, it's easier, of course. I didn't have to deal with people. That one's becoming even more important. It's interesting as we start to emerge, the sentiments are, I want to go to my local shop, but I don't want to go to a big box. Big boxes are scary, whereas my local shop is the neighbor that I want to keep in business. So I think you'll see some significant channel differences as we move forward. And then you can obviously see the role of lower costs, free shipping, and price promotion as well. So what's going to stick? The answer is, I don't know. Crystal ball for 2020 is not a good way to make money. We need to use solid data to start to look at trends and start to understand which ones are going to stay. You can see some of the behaviors that people are saying they're doing more of, and significantly more. And this is more than they used during COVID. Okay, so you have to look at the top two boxes, the darker blues, and say those people are going to be heavily engaged in grocery delivery, meal delivery, so prepared foods, video streaming, of course, such as the one we're on, and all those Zoom parties that are happening around the world. But you move into financial services and investment and financial advising online. Those are all growing radically. And then also the payment method. And this is really important. Contactless payment, this world of you hand someone a credit card and they wipe it and hand it back to you is going to go away, even where it's still there. And going true contactless is an explosion that we think is happening in most countries, and the data is supporting that. And then the last is buy now, pay later. And this is retailers getting on the mortgage game, basically, and saying, I'd rather have the sale now and the cash later and try to make a little bit of money on the deal than operate in a cash world. So just some very different behaviors that will impact our marketing efforts. So what do we think is here to stay? This is just some summary numbers in terms of what people are saying they're going to do and what's going to stick. And you can see some different categories, right? This is where we ask shoppers, what do you think you're going to do by category? Groceries and beauty and apparel. And across the board, people expect that they're going to continue to grow in markets that are further away from bricks and mortar. So what do you need to do to win? You really need to develop a seamless omnichannel experience. And these are just a few examples. And you can see, I like Sephora as an example because the in-store and the online are so closely linked, and a great way to try to get beauty care shoppers to buy a category that they weren't buying in the past. Amazon, of course, and some of their experimentation with stores. Many of you may know that they have acquired stores in the US and are continuing to do so. And there's rumors of many, many chains around the world that they're looking at. So that's an interesting thing to make sure you're paying attention to. Then over on the right, as you start to think about apparel and experiences where you can bring yourself into the store digitally and try clothes on digitally. Because in a post-COVID world, shoppers are telling us they don't want to try clothes on in store anymore because they don't know who tried it on last. And clothes certainly are not dry cleaned between trying on store to store. So how does that work? And different creative ideas happening around the world. So we're going to shift gears and give you a different voice, and I'm going to turn it on to Tony to bring this to life more around. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Turn it over to the Swiss team to talk about some of the motivations and real stories. Marianne?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Alison. And so let's move to some client business question and some case studies. So a couple couple of stories I want to share with you today. So obviously, almost all our clients need to understand the consumer journey and experience along this journey. So it's a kind of foundational understanding of consumer shopper and will be able to inform the omnichannel strategy. So the first business case is coming from a global beauty brand in the US. They wanted to better understand our shopper buy skincare products, and also our touch point can be activated to define their marketing strategy. So through a live pass, we were able to offer this holistic overview of the purchasing path, combining multiple data streams to better understand the real world behavior and influences. So thanks to qualitative and quantitative module, we were able to capture nuances and to have a deep understanding of the shopper mission. So thanks to that, the client were able to develop category and brand strategy and tactics to drive business growth. So if we move to the second story, it's a bit more innovation oriented. So Alison, if you can move, yeah, thank you. It's a bit more innovation oriented and obviously a key pillar of our activity. So it's a direct to consumer platform, and maybe you have heard about it. It's called Loop. So it's a distribution door-to-door without packaging. So this is the ice cream example coming from Häagen-Dazs. So it's like reduce, reuse, repeat. So you choose a flavor you love. Loop will deliver the reusable container to your home. You will indulge the extraordinary ice cream, and then you ship the container back to Loop to be refilled. So we had to evaluate this subscription model. So people see a high value in this model, find it unique. It was a clear message as well. However, we need to convince, or the proposition, so we need to convince about the experience and the stream less experience. So we have tested several options, several propositions for this subscription model in order to fine-tune what Loop is now proposing to the customers everywhere in the globe. If we move to the last business issue, it's about a marketplace we tested in Asia. So as you can imagine, it's heavily and hugely popular in Asia with high awareness and a wide range of products that are available on this platform. So the client wanted to grow the category sale on this specific site because they had a very low penetration. So we conduct an online survey among shoppers with also some co-browsing session to understand how consumers search, navigate the category, to understand what can influence them to choose a product and what was the reaction to the website. So yeah, a very interesting approach that helps the client to uncover triggers and barriers for online category purchase, and also it allows the client to discuss with a marketplace partner to develop tangible solution to improve category visibility and engagement through range of brands offered as well as group of relevant products. So thank you for your attention, and Tony, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Marianne, and hello, everybody. I just wanted to focus for a few moments on, I suppose, what we could call the new normal for physical locations during the pandemic and beyond. I think what we have to reflect on is as markets reopen and non-essential retailers with physical locations start to operate, they're having to do so with consumer and employee health and safety at the top of mind. Now, in many countries, there are obviously specific regulations that need to be adhered to, but equally important, consumers expect to see visible signs around health and safety measures. Fundamentally, people need reassurance. This is illustrated by work you can see here we've conducted in the US, which shows quite simply 3/4 of Americans saying that they won't be rushing back to physical locations anytime soon. The primary factor behind that being their health. They don't want to get sick. And if a particular retailer doesn't demonstrate that they're taking health and safety seriously, shoppers will go elsewhere. And interestingly, this could translate into paying a premium. And in reality, this is not just applicable to high street retail. It's applicable to all physical locations, car dealerships, petrol stations, airlines, pubs and restaurants, etc. Now, what we've seen is that some retailers are adapting well to the new reality. Can you move to the next slide, please, Alison? So some dealing well with this. You can see here, provision of hand sanitizer at the store entrance as an example, employees cleaning shopping trolleys for customers, clear floor markings showing social distancing markers and queuing management systems, and signage in store. There's a great example here you can see for Pringles. Stay 6 tins apart. It's genius. It's very memorable and shareable on Twitter and other social media. I actually found this on LinkedIn. Moving on to the next one. Stores are also using technology to manage the number of people in physical locations at any point in time. Here's an example which shows that it's not just applicable to the retail space. This is a picture of a restroom in a logistics distribution warehouse in the UK. Sensors count people in and out, and the screen automatically changes colour. So when 5 people are in, it turns red. It's simple, it's effective, and it's low cost. It's effective in managing occupancy, but also it sends the right message that the company is taking this seriously. But then we've seen bad examples. If you can move on to the next slide. Companies are doing not so well in some instances. So you can see here, the first one, no signage at all displayed outside the store. Some employees wearing masks, others not, and a complete disconnect between what customers are doing and what staff are doing. Plexiglass is in place, but these customers are wearing masks and gloves. It's their expectation that this is needed, but employees aren't doing this. Now, it may not be the company's policy to do it, but does this meet with customers' expectations? Essentially, will they come back again? If we move on, what we've identified is 5 top priorities, and it may not seem rocket science, but these are the things that every single physical location needs to take into account. And employees are critical in demonstrating the retailer's commitment to health and safety. They need to be wearing masks and gloves. There needs to be provision of hand sanitizer and sanitized trolleys and clear social distancing. Simple. Now, moving on to what consumers think about how different sectors will perform to their expectations. I think the key point is to say that 1/4 of people, so that's 1 in 4 people, wouldn't trust any sector to get it right. It's obviously very worrying. And only grocery stores have any degree of trust. That's likely to be because they've been open during the pandemic and have had time to adapt to this, but still only 1/3 of people would trust them the most. So the point here is that all sectors really need to take this seriously when reopening to ensure that customers will return, and they need to understand what it is that other sectors are doing to establish this level of confidence. Moving on to the next slide. The findings from our Health and Safety Index in the US were recently picked up by the different news channels. You can see just a few screenshots here from the Today programme and Fox News. The 3 best performing retailers, Whole Foods, Costco, Trader Joe's, have made the most positive impression on customers. It helps them to stand out from the crowd. And in our assessments, let's look at Whole Foods. 98% of employees wore face masks, so nearly 100% were wearing face masks. And 9 in 10 customers were observing proper social distancing measures, 6 feet away from each other. Plexiglass barriers were there in 95% of stores, and contactless payment, as Alison referred to earlier, was available in 87% of stores visited. Really impressive numbers. While these 3 companies are exemplars, we found many other examples where employees were either wearing face coverings incorrectly, just over the mouth rather than over the nose as well, or just not wearing them at all. Some weren't wearing gloves, and stores were often without plexiglass dividers at checkout. I actually heard of a great example recently in Australia. Woolworths, you may know, is a large grocery chain, and what they did is they changed their employees' uniforms to reflect cleanliness. Employees usually wear tartan check to reflect the company's rural farming heritage. But what they've done since the pandemic is to change their shirts into white shirts and aprons with social distancing messaging. The white shirts signifying cleanliness and hygiene. Really simple message, subliminal message to get across. So moving on to the final bit here, I think just to summarise, health and safety initiatives are important. It's clear. It's not a brain cleaner. What we saw earlier, the key point is if a company is not seen to be taking it seriously, customers will go elsewhere if they're not in place. Key things to take out are visible cues are necessary and measures need to be applied consistently, and it's the employees' actions that are critical in this. Consistency and ongoing action is key. The final point, all sectors can learn from each other. We often refer to expectations being liquid. I experienced this in this retailer, so I'd expect this in this bar, this restaurant, this bank, this auto dealership. So study what others are doing and see how these measures could be adopted in your physical locations. So that's the physical side of things. So back to Alison now to talk about technology.
Thanks, Tony. As we start to think about what do we do, one of the things that is critical is really thinking about technology differently and thinking how do we move quickly and how do we adapt new things and create a model where we can be much more agile. Now, that sounds really easy, and many people say, well, I'm doing that. We're buying on mobile, we're selling on mobile, we're doing research on mobile, but it really is much more than that. And as we start to think about the complexity of shopping behavior. So the word experimentation is important. During our lockdowns, we as individuals became remarkably resourceful, right? The Darwinian survival of the fittest certainly played out. And we started thinking about new ways to do things. Well, some of those things we like. So interestingly, in a survey we did here in the US, 40% of shoppers said they want to continue their new routine. Now, who wants to do that, right? We all want to go outside, we all want to do different things. But in my limited time outside, do I really want to spend it in the supermarket? Or would I much rather spend it out walking in the woods or going to the beach or just walking around town and enjoying a flower shop? So that new element of the routine is really important. The second point, 10% used restaurant delivery for the first time. Now, for some of us, that's hard to imagine because in many cultures we have, and many different age cohorts, we've been doing that for a very long time. But 10% of the population starting to do restaurant delivery and pickup instead of going to a restaurant, sitting down and enjoying the on-premise experience, that is a big, big number for restaurants and one that we expect will continue to be durable. The last one, 9% of groceries delivered. Sounds small when you look at only 9%, but that's just the first time. Never mind those that started using it more regularly every week, a couple times a week, or entire age cohorts that had never gone online. You know, I think personally about the fact that we are responsible for 3 grandparents that are in their 80s that live independently, and we've been buying their groceries through the Instacart ordering service now for 6 months. And my father-in-law said that he will never go back to a grocery store ever again. So start to think about those behaviors and how are you ready for those behaviors? Here's a couple of examples from a couple of different countries that are very, very different. And you start to think about percent buying online and what's happening. In Mexico here, the example is a beauty category. And before COVID, only 8% of shoppers said they would buy cosmetics online. After or during, 48%. That's a massive number. The numbers in Spain are for consumer electronics, and you see 43% before and 72% after. And by the way, both of those countries were not on the cutting edge for e-commerce, shall we say. And now if you look at the main numbers, they're pretty consistent with what we see happening in China and Korea. So massive, massive acceleration. So what does that mean in terms of customer experience and what is it going to mean about research? Well, here's one, right? Let's think about one of the most enjoyable on-premise categories, alcohol, right? And you go from a world, and these are all pictures from our SimStore virtual shopping capability where we test on-premise or in-store or online. And you go from a world of the left where shoppers are all about how do I enjoy the pub and how do I get the beer I want and what's new and what's different or what's my old favorite and what am I going to enjoy with different types of friends and what does it say about me as a person and my image. And so the research we did when we were online, when we were focused on-premise, was very emotional and very much about what's sparking purchase and what's going to get trial and what's going to get people to test your new brands. Well, now as the world has gone to one of either off-premise, right? So we're testing boring old shelves, right, in convenience stores and beer stores and supermarkets of basic products. We get in there and we start to understand the category fundamentals are very different in store than they are on premise. And when people are picking out what drives impulse, it may be something entirely different, like the color of the can or the price, which is really not visible when you are on premise. So now the migration is to online. And how do we create an experience? This is an example of one that is, honestly, it's not a beer experience. It's just a bunch of items out there. And how do we bring some of the experience on the left and start to develop new concepts for online and test and validate in virtual environments? So just kind of a very different way of shopping that leads us to a very different way of thinking about shopper research. We also need to think about all the different technologies that are out there. Because quite frankly, many of our clients are telling us, and we knew this before, but for a different reason, now that it's very difficult to do in-store shopper research because stores that are limited in count, as Tony shared with us, don't want shopper researchers in the stores. They want to save those human spots, and that's the 3 meters apart rule for those buying customers. So what can we do? And these are all technologies that have been growing for shopper research, but are now suddenly the new normal from a shopper research standpoint. So it's better understanding of social media as people are shopping more at home. They're posting more online, and so we're learning a lot through social intelligence, including in categories where social intelligence wasn't relevant before. Tony talked to the footfall tracking. We have comparable services online in passive metering, and it was very, very expensive. But suddenly it's getting much more affordable and much more scalable to actually track behaviors of shoppers on their computers, on their phones, and then survey them. And we even are giving them missions where they can go in store, so we can really create an omni-channel way of thinking about shoppers. I could go on and on about shopper research, as it is my passion and my life, really. But there are many, many capabilities available. Eye tracking is another great one. It's one that we've been using in store for many, many years, but is now available to provide neuroscience online, and to use eye tracking linked into virtual shop is a great surrogate to get ahead of shopping behaviors and do it in a super safe, super fast, super affordable global way. So, there's lots of different methodologies, and we just wanted to share some numbers from some research we've done ourselves in terms of understanding, is the safer tech-driven research valid or not? And what we've pretty much found is the answer is absolutely yes. And we're committed to continually doing research on our research to validate that. We've done some studies in store, and we found that virtual shopping of a shelf, a planogram, and shopping behavior there is 92% consistent with what we see when we test for real in a store. And it's safe, and it's confidential, and it's fast. So those are all things that are really important. And the same thing's happening on e-commerce. And we actually expect e-commerce will get closer to a pure correlation very soon as shoppers get more and more used to doing that. So it's just a bit of reinforcement that we should continue to do research. We should continue to understand these trends, and we really should start to do so now. Within weeks of coming out of lockdown, new behaviors are establishing, and so we need to make sure that we're ready for those online. And Tony's going to talk about getting ready for those in store as well. Tony, we can't hear you.
Okay, should be working now. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, good. Thank you. Apologies for that. So a lot of talk so far around a huge increase in online activity as we've been forced to adapt to new behaviours, even mattress buying. Who'd have thought that? And what we believe, and I'm sure all of you on the call will be thinking about how you take this opportunity to accelerate your digital strategy. And what you want to know is whether the customer experience meets expectations along the journey. So what are the things that we're being asked, and what is it you need to know? So how is the surge in demand for digital impacting the overall customer experience right now and based on current expectations and in the future? What is the impact in online sales, the increase in online sales having on delivery or pickup wait times? Is it actually pushing customers away because they're having a bad experience? If you're using third-party logistics delivery companies, are they meeting your expectations and actually delivering on your brand promise, the expectations your customers have of you as a brand because of their experience of you in the past? And obviously from a health and safety perspective, were all the pickup or delivery instructions followed by employees or delivery drivers, maybe through the third-party logistics companies? So if we actually think about the entire journey from browsing through to pickup or delivery on the next slide, yeah, health and safety measures need to be taken into account where there's physical contact, but there are lots of other aspects that customers and suppliers are struggling with, which cause frustration and obviously need to be fixed. And this slide is just illustrative of some of the points along the journey, and it's a hypothetical journey, some of the points along the journey that need to be focused on to ensure a successful customer experience. So thinking about the browsing experience, companies that have been selling digitally for some time will have this covered and probably deliver a great online experience. But we do know of situations where customers have gone through an online purchase only to find out at the very end that the item is either out of stock or there is a long delivery wait time. Customers are expecting that to be made clearer early in the actual browsing journey, purchasing journey. Just a very simple thing. What about notifications along the journey? Customers obviously expect to be notified about the status of their order. So at the very least, a thank you for your order, email or text, confirming the order has been received and what happens next. Some companies, but not all, enable customers to track their order, either through their website or through the delivery company's app. Customers, the key point is that customers expect you to make it easy. Show them you're making an effort to keep them updated, rather than them having to make the effort themselves. And from work we've done outside of this and before the pandemic, what we've seen is more often than not, customers across all sectors feel that they put more effort into getting things resolved than the company does. The customer effort is more than the company's effort, and that causes problems. If customers are picking up in store or the curb, are the purchases ready at the time they've been told they would be? Or do they have to wait around? And if they have to wait around, is that in a safe environment? And what about compliance generally with health and safety measures? And then there are the obvious aspects around delivery itself. Is it delivered on time? Is there a choice of delivery slots? Is the order accurate and complete? And if it's food, is it the right temperature, hot or cold? I'm sure I'm not the only one on this call who's actually experienced cold, hot food during lockdown. So you see what I've done here as well is I've talked about inquiry handling at each of the different stages, and this is something that we see as key, and it's something that we often find there is a disconnect between customers' expectations and what companies are doing. As I said, we've got to make it easy, and you've got to handle it effectively using things like live chat, email, and easy to navigate call center systems. And I think what we're seeing is that newer players in the direct to consumer distribution model are having to handle this type of direct consumer interaction for the first time ever, either with their own call centers, their own agents, or using a third-party provider. And during lockdown, this has been particularly challenging. Call centers have closed, agents are having to work from home, and they've experienced technical problems through poor Wi-Fi or broadband connectivity. And this is all at the same time that call center volumes have exploded. I think after lockdown, with call centres reopening under social distancing rules, capacity will never go back to normal, or not for some time at least. And so these challenges will continue to exist. So understanding how to establish what customers are expecting and mitigating any problems that you may have in actually meeting those expectations is critical. So I think throughout the journey, it's key that we understand and manage customers' expectations at each stage. Delivering to expectations will be key to keeping customers for the longer term. Stefan, I know that you wanted to talk about this specifically in the context of auto dealerships.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Okay, yes. So thanks, Tony. To illustrate exactly what you have described, let's take this example of automotive based on the case that we did. I mean, what does it mean in terms of integrating within the customer journey for automotive dealers industry? Having in mind that often in a lot of markets they are a bit behind in this integration because it remains normally a sector where I would say physical interaction is the first. So next slide, please. So based on a case we did, so it's in South Africa, but of course it applies in most of the market. It has been observed that in the current context, in May 2020, the sales of a specific major automotive dealer in the countries have been declining of 52%. But at the same time, on the same period, the total search for vehicles increased of 50% online and with other kind of channels. So of course, during the pandemic, but probably beyond, as described before, this will only increase more and more, and shopper will go digital, including in this sector. We also find out that a customer, when a customer goes on a dealer website, if there is no answer between 5 and 10 minutes, the sale is lost in 55% of the case. If it exceeds 10 minutes, then we divide by 10 any chance to convert the sales. In the observation that we did, we also observed that in the specific case, just as an example, in one instance, only 1 out of 5 inquiries in a particular dealer was followed up. And then at the second connection, it was even cut by half, meaning that for this dealer, it means a potential loss of 90% of the sales, and so a massive loss. So the question, of course, in this context is how to mitigate that, what needs to be changed, how to integrate better the process into the dealer customer journey in order to maximize the sales. So next slide, please. So basically, what we found out for customer and what customer are expecting, it's really, and following this customer journey, it's really about integrating the right tools, the right interaction at the right time of the process, taking into account the move from customer. So if you think about online browsing and purchasing, it's first of all about better management of the sales inquiries. We have seen that it has a direct impact on the sales, but it's also finding more information online, easier to find. More detail. It's about integrating also maybe some more innovative tools within this sector, like car video demonstrations, for example. To some extent, the ability to purchase or pre-purchase the vehicles online, and also, of course, signing all the documentation and the administrative stuff through this channel. When it comes to notification, in this case, there is an expectation for a kind of live portal. Of course, when you buy a car, it's usually a pretty big investment. So you are expecting clarity on the way the appointment is settled. You are expecting live interaction in case you have questions, so in case you need some interaction with the seller in the meantime. A management of the planning for the visit, the physical visit when they are needed, because of course, in the current context, but we could also expect it will last after. It's about minimizing the on-site interaction. So of course, all the safety measures needs to be in place, but it's about using the digital channel in order to have a kind of readiness of the journey. So the car is available, the information that are needed are in the hands of the dealer up front. It's about the experience, reducing the waiting time, the compliance with all the instructions and so on, the staffing as well, of course, social distancing. And when it comes to delivery, you can also implement some new ways of doing. Of course, the ongoing communication through the portal is a new way of interacting with your dealer, but you can also imagine some what we would call white glove type of home or office delivery of your car. Someone is bringing your car with all the sanitizing required and so on, and you get your car to some extent ready to go. And at the end, once again, it's about the overall experience. We have seen it has massive impact on the sales, of course. So it's about retaining your customer. It's about addressing and sustain the satisfaction in the new reality. And at the end, optimize your sales. It's return on invest.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Thank you to all the presenters, Marianne, Alison, Tony. To summarize, we talked about seamless omnichannel experiences. We talked about digital. It's very important at this stage to understand the consumer expectations for each of the channel and to also benchmark and assess your performance, the performance of your company in comparison to these expectations. We believe this is critical for the future. Thanks again also for your participation and for your questions. I think we have time to pick up one or two of them. And just looking at the questions, maybe the first one could be something for Alison as well as for Tony. What do you think of all the things you've presented? What is more of a one-time COVID effect? So once the virus is away, also the effect is away, and what will be lasting? So maybe Alison, if you want to start.
That's the question, right? And here's where we're looking into our crystal ball and saying what's going to stick and what won't. In terms of the first part of that question, in terms of what won't stick, I think the fear and anxiety part of this won't stick. And we didn't talk about that in great detail. But if you think about the anxiety that we're all, or most of us, are still under, and in many cases is getting worse in some places in the world, that changes your mindset and the way you're thinking about shopping. So some of that anxiety, at least this is my hope, and will continue to decrease, and we'll get used to it. And as we get used to it, then it becomes just the way we shop. In terms of what will stick, there is no doubt. It's the digitalization of shopping. And it doesn't matter whether you're in a physical store or you're in a pure e-commerce world, or like most of us, in between all the time. We need to think digital. And not just for placing the order, but also for some of the picking up and things that Tony was talking about. And also for something that we didn't emphasize today, but is really critical, and that's speed. And I know we all feel it in our work lives and our personal lives in many ways, but in shopping, the expectation for how fast something can be ordered and delivered has gone through the roof. And I expect that that will continue to stay. So don't think that we can, sit back and expect shoppers to come to us. We have to get to them better, faster, quicker, forever.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Tony, what do you think?
I think just to add a couple of things to that. So I think digital is obviously critical, and that's why I do think that we're going to see more and more companies accelerating their approach to digital. So it's about what companies, what you as organizations want to stick, which is the important thing. So, it's not just in, say, in the retail space. If you think about in the financial services sector, the banking industry for years has been trying to get customers to do some of the more basic transactions, which take up a lot of time in branch and unnecessary time in branch, to become more digital. So it's about understanding cohorts of people who've never done things via digital apps, by mobile apps or via online banking in the past, but have had to do that during the pandemic, how to nudge them to continue to do that, how to make it easier. I think I'll give the example of Barclays Digital Eagles. A few years back, I think it's about 3 or 4 years ago, they actually introduced this group of people in branch to help people understand how to do online banking, make it easy for them, show them how to do it on their iPad and that sort of thing. So I think it's about thinking about what the barriers to continue should be and how you address those is one thing. But linked to that, a lot of physical locations won't open ever again. There's stories on a daily basis of redundancies of retailers saying we're going to cut half of our outlets. So the ability for people to go to physical outlets is going to be diminished in the future. So those are two things that are going to stick. And I genuinely believe that the health and safety issues aren't just an overnight thing. I think it's going to carry on for a good 12 to 18 months. So it's not, and who's going to be the store to take the first gamble and say, right, we're going to stop doing hand sanitizer? What will happen then? So I think it's something that's going to be there for some time, and I do think what is going to stick is the need to actually think about the whole digital process and making it easy for customers.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Alison. I think that's a very good food for thoughts also for the end of this webinar. And thanks for everybody for joining today's webinar. We are going to share the recording as well as the deck beginning of next week. This webinar is part of a series of webinars we are conducting this year. So in April, for example, we talked about sustainability, in May about distinctive brand assets, and today about physical and digital fundamentals. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and to your respective Ipsos contact. Thanks again for joining, stay safe, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.